Linear equations. So we'll be looking at equations and trying to decide if they are linear or if they are not linear. And by linear, I mean that when I graph them, they make a straight line on a coordinate plane. So we're looking at equations and deciding if we did graph them, would they create a straight line or would they create some other kind of shape to them. Linear equations, only a straight line. So some things that we will not see in a linear equations. Linear equations do not have a variable times a variable, and that could mean a variable times itself, so like x squared or x cubed, that's a variable times a variable. Linear equations do not have division by a variable, so you'll never see a variable in the denominator of a fraction. And linear equations do not have more than two variables, so you might see x and y, you might see a and b, but if you see a third variable, it's not linear. These are perfectly legitimate equations, they are just not linear. They'll make another shape when we look at a coordinate plane and a graph of that particular equation. So let's take a look at some equations and decide if they are linear or not. So our directions here are determine if the equation is linear, so first a yes or a no. Second, if so, we're going to write the equation in standard form. So standard form looks like ax plus by equals c. And we have a few other rules on there. A has to be greater than or equal to 0. A and b can't both be 0. A, b, and c have to all be integers with no other common factor other than 1, which we'll get into later, our standard form. But we're just going to look at a simple version of our standard form. So our first equation, 5x plus 3y equals z plus 2. So is that linear? So again, if we kind of look at the general rules that we see, it doesn't have variable times a variable, doesn't have division by a variable, but it does have more than two variables. So I see x and I see y and then I also see z. So because this has three variables in it, more than two, this is not a linear equation. Again, it's a perfectly good equation, it just doesn't form a straight line on the coordinate plane. Second equation, 3/4 x equals y plus 8. I don't see any of these popping up, so let's see if we can put it into standard form. If I can put it in standard form, then it is definitely linear. So what we're going to do is we're first going to get rid of all the fractions here. So I'm going to divide by 4 and come up with 3x equals 4y plus 32. Next I'm going to try to get the x and the y on the same side so I can have it look like this form. So I'm going to subtract my 4y from each side. So I have 3x minus 4y equals 32. So there's my standard form. I didn't see anything going against a standard form equation, so yes, this is a linear equation. All right, let's look at a few others. So we have y equals 4x plus 5. Again, I do not see a variable times itself. I do not see division by a variable, and I do not see that I have more than two variables here, so it's looking very much linear. So let's take a look at rewriting it in standard form. I'm going to get both of the variables on one side here, so I have subtract my y. And then I want to get my constant on the other side, so I'm going to subtract my 5x. I'm going to, at the last minute, switch things around here. So I have 4x minus y equals negative 5. And you might wonder, well, why didn't I just subtract the 4x right at the beginning? I could have done that. I don't want to end up with a negative 4x starting off my standard form, which is why I manipulated it so that I had a positive coefficient of x there. That's what we want to see in our standard form. So since I can write this in standard form, yes, this is a linear equation. 8x minus xy equals 7. Is that linear? Well, right off the bat, I see that I have a variable times a variable, which means this is not linear. Again, it will be perfectly lovely equation with a lovely graph. It's just not a linear equation. So my answer is no, and we've got a variable times a variable. So it's not linear. Second, what are we up to here? 5. 5 equals x squared plus y. Again, I see x squared. So that's a variable times a variable. That's x times itself. So this is not a linear equation. It'll make a different shape on the graph. We'll get to those equations eventually this year. And then I have 8 over x equals y minus 4. So here I see that I've got dividing by a variable. I have my variable in my denominator there. I can't do that. That does not give me a linear equation. So no, it's not linear because we're dividing by a variable. So again, we're just determining, is it linear or not? We're just categorizing these. And if it is linear, then we're writing it in standard form.